I'm going to talk about and show you some images from past assignment 1 turn-ins. So in assignment 1, you will be using the markers and your fine tip pens to create black and white abstracts of the word tension, zoom, and rock and water. So each of these word prompts will be a single drawing. I expect you to do several sketches to come up with different ideas and then pick your best idea to execute on a full sheet of the Bristol paper. So again, it'll be pen and ink on Bristol. It should be 11 by 14 or 11 by 17, whatever size your paper is. So the first word we're going to look at is tension. So here you can interpret tension however you want. I will show you some of what these students chose to incorporate. Now, your goal here is to do an abstract drawing that gives you the feel of tension. So in this first upper left-hand corner, the students use the inspiration of the heartbeat or like an EKG monitor, and that rhythmic pulsing that, although shows life, also creates a sense of tension. That pause between the beat inherently has a tense moment. So that's where she drew her inspiration. As you can see, she used different pen sizes, different repetitions, some very large, this stroke down in front. And of course, that slanted angle is a more tense active angle than a straight line, giving that overall feeling. So this is an absolutely excellent example of a way to interpret tension. All of these really are. Here in the center top, we have the idea of like fiber fraying or hair pulling apart, or that like the smoke. It's a softer version of tension, but you still get the tenseness between the different lines and the thicknesses and this snarl in the middle and how it gets larger and pulls apart. In the upper right, we have the tense moment of the explosion, the idea of tension being an overwhelming pressure, and it just being so pressurized that it explodes. We can see a hint at landscape, like trees or other mountains in the background, as well as that chaotic explosion. Here in the bottom left, the student was looking at like power lines and like telephone lines, and that connection between each tower and how that connection can break. And you zoom in, you can see different small breaks in the lines and how those flow together. Again, like this upper middle, a little bit softer, more subtle, but again, with the different darknesses, he actually created some shading by using hatching marks versus solid black and solid white, creating depth in the picture as well. Center bottom, this is a really simple example of tension, but it's well thought out and well executed. You see the lines on the bottom half, they're all solid with just these two little squares, giving you a break in the line. They're off center. They kind of feel like staircases that aren't quite completed, giving you this missing element. So this strip in the middle, that missing section, creates its own tension because it's a void. Again, extremely well thought out, as in the top half, it's lighter with every other line, and then this section is completely blank. A lot of times these really simple designs don't actually show the prompt very well, but this student executed it very nicely. And in this last, the bottom right, the student was thinking about how air brakes around like a supersonic jet was his inspiration for it, and that tension of the airflow that creates speed. And so here he has the white space representing his jet, the black, the space around it. And then the airflow is created by these hundreds and hundreds of thin micro lines that shoot out and go around the jet, splitting the air, splitting the black and white into this gray, creating its own sense of tension. This one also has a lot of zoom involved as the lines get closer together as they approach the jet, giving us a sense of like movement through space. Just how this one, the layering allows for that sense of depth as well. So they're more three-dimensional feeling than some of these others that have a very flat space. So next we're going to look at zoom. And here we have a couple softer examples of zoom. The idea of like just instead of like zoom as in speed or zoom as, here we're looking at it more as zoom as in movement or flow. So in this upper left corner, we have these undulations, almost like organic feeling lines as they move in and out of each other and around. Kind of reminds me of like tubers or roots growing, maybe worms burrowing in the earth, but really a much softer, but again, a lot of depth, a lot of movement in and out, that zooming movement of forward and back. The bottom left here, we get a much more directional line. He was referencing like prisms, like when you split the color white light into the rays of color, that idea of prisms bouncing back and forth. And you can see how he started with a smaller shape, and as the shapes increase, they get bigger, and that gives us a sense of movement, dimension, and flow through the piece, creating that zoom, as well as the different line densities, the thick and very thin lines, accentuating that. The center bottom one, this is really unique. I haven't had a lot of students do this, although it's fantastic, is she zoomed to a point. So instead of just moving in and out, as like this one, the lines that reference go off the page, this one we're zooming to this point, and she has several different geometric shapes starting at that point and going outwards, from these beautiful spirals to these variegated lines to these more solid black and whites. She's referencing the Fibonacci spiral for composition, as well as that zooming quality. Here is another sort of organic, this bottom right, organic flow. Again, the undulation of in and out. To me, this reminds me of like a woven basket. Like if you look at the side of it, that kind of texture and shape you get as the materials move forward and back. This upper right is much more traditional zoom, with it going to a like center point, but just rushing, all the shapes rushing towards. There is a bit of tension in this because the student chose to, instead of just using straight lines and like triangular shapes, to use these really irregular shapes with all these chaotic sideways lines that really enhance the piece to a higher level than just straight lines zooming in or concentric circles zooming in, which I see a lot of. It's a really great, a nice way of creating different tones too, with the density of the lines going closer together as they get farther away, giving us more sense of depth in the piece. And this one, it pulls to the a little bit more traditional, just shape and shape and shape, but the student has added some variety, canting the different rectangular shapes, breaking it up so it feels almost like you're looking at this zooming space through like shattered glass or a dimensional plane, almost like you're in a room and this is the corner and you're looking across it. So some really, really unique, interesting approaches here that I hope give you some ideas of your own. And lastly, we're looking at rock and water. Um, so you do want to be careful here that you don't get too literal or too realistic. You do want to still keep that element of abstraction. So here the student in the upper right has chosen to give us a 3/4 view or a side angle of rocks actually in water, but he's broken down the shapes into more rudimentary geometric um, shapes so that it's not like a fully illustrated rock in water, but it does give us almost that like ice cubes floating in a Coke sort of feeling. The center top image is very abstract. These bulbous shapes become the rocks, and the waves across the top are the water, each one full of this interesting filigree and paisley like designs that add unique characteristics to each shape, giving them a unique variety of textures and shapes, but still getting that sense of like order. They almost look like marbles in a dish. This upper left one, this is a more traditional, simpler approach, although this took the student quite some time, as she thought of these different rocks or ripples from the water as the rocks might splash and create those concentric circles that go out. And she has where they're overlapping the different, if you toss 3 rocks in a puddle, the ripples overlap and create the little waves, so she has those indicated in there as well. Bottom left corner, we have a more almost, I feel like it feels like an Asian inspired sand garden or Japanese garden. It just has that really tranquil feeling to it. The white is actually the water. There's the breaks, which are stones in the water, and then this is the sun's reflection on the water, and that's where the student was pulling their inspiration. Here in the center bottom, we have bubbles, and the bubbles are getting really close to being a little too realistic, but I do think the piece works so tremendously well. It is a below the water surface idea of the rock going through the water. So you see those ripples that are created by the rock breaking the surface, but also the bubbles that then float back up as the rock descends. So this really interesting perspective. This last semester, a lot of students broke out of just like looking down where we get from these two and looking at different angles below, riverbed, above but at an angle. And this one is a really fun idea. The student wanted to think on how the rock moves through water. So like not just that, but if you're in like a rapid and the water is pushing the rock through the stream, how that rock's journey might go. So he has the swooshing design as the like rapid moving water, and then this straight jagged geometrical line is creating the path of the rock with these little splotchy blobs being the rock at different states through its journey. Part of the splotchiness was one of the pens we were using last semester had a tendency to blurp paint, and was quite a challenge for several students. But in this case, he was trying to use that as like a more organic form of the rock. So I hope these 3 pages of examples help you come up with some ideas of your own. Again, you're trying to make abstract drawings using your pens and your ink Sharpies on your Bristol paper. 3 prints, 1 print for tension, 1 print for zoom, and 1 print for rock and water. Remember to post on the discussion board, and also your sketches and your sketchbook one turn-ins. And I look forward to seeing everyone's work progress and evolve.